Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Officer Training School. My name is Joshua Joshi Howard, and today we're going to be talking about the Krieg Combat Engineers. Krieg Combat Engineers have been a very interesting addition to the recent Guard Codex that we've had, and they've gone from being ludicrously cheap in the original Codex points to being pretty good during the early days of the Codex when we actually got the official points to now they're just kind of okay. But we'll go ahead and talk about them, what they do, what their battlefield role is, and why this unit kind of seems to go either all in, like you see a bunch of them, or you don't see very many of them at any given point. So, as always, we're going to be talking about the basics of the engineers, how they are in a hyper competitive niche, whether or not you want to take 5s or 10s, the orders and stratagems that you use for them, and their general strategy, and how you tend to use them on the table. So, in terms of the basics for engineers, they don't really do a lot of damage, but they do a fair amount of what I like to call funny mortal wounds. You throw grenades, you have the remote mine, and suddenly you can just seemingly take down things that are way more durable than you had initially expected. At the same time, the engineer is significantly more durable than Katachan, but not nearly as much damage as Kazarkin. So they end up filling a niche where they are move blocking and midward skirmishers. So let's talk about how you equip them. To be honest, it really doesn't matter that much. The two things that you will always take is you're going to take the remote mine and a flamer. And then the Watchmaster will have a power weapon and your choice between the hand flamer and the plasma pistol. The hand flamer is maybe a little bit better right now at the time of recording due to the number of elf players there are in the current meta, but the plasma pistol might be slightly better if you're playing in a more heavy marine meta. Realistically, it's going to change. Maybe you'll kill an extra model over the course of the game, so it doesn't matter that much. And then lastly, you should be taking shotguns, but if you really like the trench clubs because you like the look of them, it's not going to change their role very much. They're going to be a little bit better at beating up like cultists and melee with the trench clubs, but having the ability to advance and shoot with the assault keyword on the shotguns is also nice. So before we continue talking about engineers, I kind of want to talk about the competitive niche that they sit in. And this is partly inspired by a recent video that Morty and Glory put out where he was talking about how all of the new units are gimmicks. And once their gimmick is gone, you don't see the unit taken much at all. But I don't really think that's true. And to quote Wesley St. Hines, Guard has very few B and C tier datasheets, almost the entire codex is A and D. And we have to kind of look at the fact that we have a lot of units that have overlapping roles. And it very often comes down to a question of which one is the most points efficient at the role and which one can actually do the things that we want it to. And engineers sit in a spot where they are directly competing with Katachan jungle fighters and Kazarkin at any given point. And very small changes to the points cost or very small changes to the meta around it can very quickly change which of them are better at any given point. At the same time, a lot of the jobs that these units are currently doing can oftentimes be taken up by other units at the same time. The rest of these units aren't directly competing with engineers, but oftentimes they do the same thing that engineers are taken in a list to do. Katachan heavy weapon squads with the Scout 6 and the large bases end up taking up a lot of space in a way that you would oftentimes do with engineers. Till and Rough Riders are very fast. They're going to be going out and doing some early move blocking, maybe killing some small units. Ogren, Ratlings, Scout Sentinel, Hydra, and Chimera Torax, like they are all just skirmishing units. They are all just units that are questioning how points efficient is this unit at the time in order to take up space and deny it from our opponents. And these are some of the things that the Krieg Engineers are generally being asked to do. They are cheap, efficient skirmishing and screening units that have Scout. They're useful for putting OC in places and forcing our opponent to come out and fight them. And they just take up space. And so a major reason why engineers have kind of fallen off right now, and they were everywhere when they still had the 12-inch version and the indirect version of their mine, it's not so much that the datasheet is worse. They still do what they were doing before, especially since a lot of the time you needed to show the mine to your opponent anyway if you wanted to throw grenades. It's mostly a matter of engineers are now not the best choice that you can take. But this can change very quickly. If Kazarkin go up 5 to 10 points, if Katachan go up 5 points, engineers will suddenly be much more attractive again. Because it all comes down to which one does the job that we want it to the cheapest and the best. So even though engineers right this moment are potentially not as good as Katachan or Kazarkin, when the next balanced data slate hits, it could very easily move right on back to engineers being the best. Because they are all so close realistically in how powerful they are that it is going to really depend on how many points they actually all are going to be costing. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about what we actually do with engineers. And one of the questions that you oftentimes see is, do you want to take engineers in groups of 5s or 10s? And the answer is they're both good, but they tend to have slightly different roles. 5-man units can fit in transports alongside heavy weapon squads, and they're a little bit cheaper, but they're also easier to remove. Whereas 10-man units take a surprising amount of punishment to remove. One of the major reasons why I was liking 10-man units was there's a lot of Ultramarines Gladius, a lot of Ultramarines Ironstorm in my local meta. They were running a lot of Vindicators and a lot of Ballistic Dreadnoughts, and neither of these units were consistently killing a unit of 10 engineers, even with Oath of Moment against that target. However, both of these are going to fairly consistently kill 5 engineers. And understanding that engineers are really top heavy, with most of the strength of the unit in the last couple of models being the Watchmaster, the Flamer, and the Remote Mine, living with 2 to 3 models is a really big deal because that can oftentimes be another free grenade that we're going to be able to throw with them. So if you want one-shot units that are only going to do their job one time, 5s are better for that because they're cheaper. However, if you're trying to find units that you're going to be getting a little bit more value out of because they will live more than one activation of your opponent, the 10-man units suddenly become a lot more interesting. Let's go ahead and take a moment to talk about the orders and stratagems as well. For your orders, you're mostly just doing the normal stuff that you would be doing with guard infantry. Move, 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 and duty and honor are the two that are the most likely to help score or prevent your opponent from scoring, because it helps you get to those spots so you can do a secondary, or helps you get onto those objectives to put OC there so your opponent can't interact with it. First rank fire, second rank fire, on the other hand, doesn't actually do anything since all of their weapons are not rapid fire. So if you want to increase their shooting output, you're going to have to do it with take aim. And then lastly, take cover is surprisingly useful for this unit because it goes from having a 4-up to a 3-up, so you're taking 2/3 of the damage by giving them take cover that you would against AP0 weapons. For stratagems, the main one that you're doing is going to be grenades, which, as part of their datasheet, they get to do that for free. So if you have engineers in your army, as long as they're alive, you're going to be doing grenades with them on most turns. For some reason, they also have the smoke keyword. As for the rest of them, they're pretty situational. Scramble field and tanglefoot grenades are pretty good because you're going to have this unit pretty far forward a lot of the time. Insane bravery and heroic intervention are always useful, and of course, reinforcements are nice if you want to do this early in the game to just have a little bit more pressure. However, it's oftentimes competing with things like Kazarkin or Battle Light units for secret mission and more OC that we could potentially put in the game. One of the really nice things about engineers is that you can take them in units of 5. And this leads to a lot of fun tricks because that means that they can also fit into a Taurox or a Chimera with a Krieg heavy weapon squad with flamers. One of the really nice ones is we can choose to start the engineers outside of the Taurox because sometimes we are going to need that emergency screen. If we're playing up against world leaders on Search and Destroy and we know that they're going to be charging right at us, having that small unit of 5 guys with Scout 6 can put a really big damper into their plans. Then, if we happen to go first, we can choose to put them into the Taurox anyway with their normal move. Another thing that we can do is we can start the Flamers outside of the Chimera and the Engineers inside. Then the Engineers will go forward with their Scout move at the very beginning of the game, and then we can take the Flamers and advance them into the Chimera and still use one of them out of the firing deck on the top. And this can be really useful for giving the Krieg Heavy Flamers a lot of functional extra movement. And of course, the easiest one is you just start both of them inside the same transport so that whenever they disembark, it's like getting a pseudo move, move, move. But having the flexibility to choose whether or not you want the Engineers or the Flamers or both inside the transport at the beginning of the game gives you a lot of flexibility in how you actually want to play all of your different game plans. Let's go ahead and talk about the remote mine, because it has been nerfed since the original version of the rule was written. As of the time of recording, you need to be within 9 inches, and you also need to be visible to the thing that you're trying to shoot the remote mine at. However, you aren't restricted by falling back or advancing or being in engagement range, so this can be useful for trying to kill something out of a combat in order to free up potentially a tank in order to allow it to shoot without penalty. Some of the big things to keep in mind with this is we can no longer bring them out of reserve and still shoot a remote mine at something. But ultimately, the remote mine is nice, but it's pretty inconsistent on a 3-up, and because you're only rolling 1 die, a lot of the time it will not go off. So if you are relying on that damage in order to actually try and kill something, it's probably not the best plan that you can make for the turn. Just make sure that if you're going to use it, you don't line up such that you can just see one model against multi-model units. If your opponent pulls the one casualty such that everything else can't shoot, using the remote mine here can oftentimes be a mistake. Also, just talking about the grenades as well. I see a lot of people do the ordering of activations incorrectly, and one of them is doing the grenade with a unit of Krieg Engineers immediately, right at the beginning of the shooting phase. However, this is oftentimes unnecessary. When you're lining up different things to shoot at a particular target, shoot everything else that only has that target first. Sometimes you're going to get lucky and you don't need to throw a grenade at that target. Most of the time, you're still going to throw a grenade at that target anyway. But sometimes, you'll high roll your shooting, and now you can throw a grenade at something else if you want to. But you should always give yourself the opportunity to high roll with things that you know you're going to be doing anyway. And waiting to see what the outcome of those dice rolls are can really help inform your subsequent decisions. So which detachments like to take engineers? Honestly, they're pretty much okay in just about every detachment. Because they do so little damage, you're mostly just taking them for the bodies and the free grenade more than anything else. So they are about as good in every detachment as they are in any other. They do get a little bit of benefit in pretty much every detachment as well. Combined, giving them lethals, you can get the cover from recon. Mechanized +1 to wound is okay, but it's usually better done on other units. Bridgehead giving the reroll once to hit is also nice. Hammer and Siege don't directly help, but Hammer really likes Toroxes, so that's good for Krieg Engineers. But to go ahead and close this out, this unit is really not that complicated. And I would generally encourage that if you are going to be playing Krieg Engineers in your list, don't overthink it too heavily. Don't rely on the remote mine, and don't really expect them to do a lot of damage. They can beat up on cultists fairly effectively, and oftentimes your opponents will be surprised at how little damage their cultists are going to be doing to Krieg Engineers. So most of the time when you're looking at taking engineers, it is either a downgrade from Kazarkin or an upgrade from Katachan. They mostly all do the same thing. They're going to be taking up space for your opponents, they're going to be nuisance charging things, they're going to be in your opponent's way. And as long as you can keep that in the front of your mind and don't expect engineers to do too much damage other than just be places, you're going to have a lot of success with engineers. So like I said, thank you for coming in and taking a look at this officer training school. Engineers are not super complicated. Give them take cover, make sure you can keep them alive. Remember that having one guy left in the unit is a really big deal. And go put these in your opponent's way so that your opponent has to deal with them. And with that, we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.